It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. The Hindi crime drama Killer Soup is now available on Netflix, and it uses dark comedy and mystery as its ingredients. So, are you going to want to add this to your binge list? In a quest to get her restaurant, talentless chef Swathi Shetty cooks up a master plan to replace her husband Prabhu with her lover Umesh. But when a bumbling local inspector and a few amateur villains get involved, too many cooks threaten to spoil the broth. All right, so the first thing to know about this 8 episode crime story is that it is a loose retelling of Shakespeare's Macbeth. We got a man who replaces his lover's husband after the dude is dead, but then as the new husband is racked by guilt, calamity begins to strike and then the body count begins to grow. The second thing to know in this show is that the first episode, it's a chore to get through. I mean, it takes just about the entirety of the episode to find its groove and settle into what it wants to become. Numerous times, I almost tapped out because I just wasn't clicking with it. But I really wanted to find out what was going to happen and what this was all about. So by sticking with it, the show did considerably improve. Now, it feels like there's a lot of players in the cast, but only a handful of them are really key to the overall story. We've got Swathi, Umesh, Prabhu, Arvind, Dupali, Apu, Lucas, and Hassan. Okay, there really are a bunch that get to be just key to the plot. But the gist of the show is that Swathi and Umesh are lovers, and when Prabhu dies, Umesh becomes Prabhu. But when an accident happens, Detective Hassan begins to become obsessed with the twists, and luckily has Thupali to help him along. Now, there's a ton of family drama in this series, and I didn't even correlate this with Macbeth until the very end. But once I knew that, I could definitely see where this drew its inspiration. And like any Shakespearean tragedy, the body count can become high. And this one slowly increases thanks to circumstances that are brought about by behaviors that stem from guilt. Now, the tone of the show varies between a dark comedy with way more focus on the dark than the comedy, but then also infuses in drama that comes very close to resembling a soap opera. Then there's intriguing mystery, but most of that does come about because a few story elements involving side characters just get hints and teases about the truth. Now, for the deaths and any devious actions, we get to see all of it as it plays out, so there isn't any question to what's going on or who's responsible. Now, because this does shift in tone, it comes across as a bit confused or convoluted in what kind of story the show wants to put forward. Now, I'm not saying the combo doesn't work in the long run, but from episode to episode, and sometimes even scene to scene, the shift in story flavor, it's a bit jarring. But even with that, the family drama that we see play out with all the scheming and conniving makes for some entertaining characters. A few of them become more cartoony because their outbursts are just over the top, but that doesn't detract from the stress that's formed between family members. And in some cases, it even amps up the tension thanks to explosive personalities that are very unpredictable. Now, I'm glad that the episodes don't stick to a uniform length, but instead use only as much time as needed for each segment. That means that some episodes are 43 minutes, while others are an hour. Now, I found myself becoming engrossed in the story, especially as we'd get sequences and scenarios that felt like they belonged in If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, where, one action would inadvertently create a complication that then developed into a larger problem, and then grew once more into something unexpectedly deadly. Now, I loved how I could feel the tension that some of the characters were experiencing, especially because sometimes they weren't the nicest of people, but they didn't expect to have a situation turn out like it did, making them appear guilty even if they weren't. And it's especially useful as a story device because the not-so-nice person, they're already viewed as suspicious, making it even more difficult to explain a circumstance. Now, I think where the series suffers the most is in the circular storytelling that we get. It feels as if situations and interactions are stretched for longer than they need to be, and then become aggravating because the pace is stunted rather than streamlined. Now, there are a lot of elements thrown into the story at the beginning, and sometimes these are there to create misdirection, other times just doubt or motive. Now, the complexity of the story, I think it's good, but it does take too long to get to some of the payoffs. The last 3 episodes, though, they become more urgent as the story begins to wrap up, and that renewed energy for the pacing, it made for an exciting watch. There's this montage sequence in the final episode that created this false sense of wrapping up, only to continue then for another 10 or 15 minutes to bring about the real ending. Now, I don't mind this, but it was a bit odd at first. Now, something that may work for you or not is that there's somewhat of a supernatural bent to part of the story. And the way it's presented makes it seem like what we watch is happening in reality. But I would have preferred this area to be established more as a mental puzzle that's being solved. And the problem with going with my preference is that a character relationship hasn't been established to be strong. And in order to have the mental puzzle aspect, characters need to know each other deeply and draw on memories and experiences that then help to form solutions. Now, I don't mind the supernatural angle, but it then does move the story more out of the realm of possibility, and it also creates a massive plot convenience. So, for as rough as the start of the show is and how mixed the tone is overall, Killer Soup finally finds a recipe to combine the unstable personalities of the characters with guilt ridden calamity and complications to serve up an engaging final course. The storytelling can be stretched longer than necessary, and the inclusion of the vague supernatural begins to lose story grounding, but all in all, the complex and flawed players make this story an enjoyable watch. There's a little sex, no nudity, some profanity, and a ton of violence, including domestic abuse. I give Killer Soup 3.5 out of 5 couches. So, what are you binging right now? Anything that I should have on my watch list? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.